It's a good day. I was at the site conference and I had a really good session today. And I think I want to talk about this also in light of the motivation for why we're doing this. We're going to seminars about economics and it seems pretty far-fetched. I'm pretty sure I'm the only investor who is at that seminar, at least to my knowledge. I could be wrong. And I think I can't emphasize enough. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And we've spoken about reading books and those sort of things. And I think going to these types of seminars is absolutely key. And I think it helps you think, it helps you rethink certain assumption, and it sometimes inspires you. And this is what happened today. I attended a presentation by a person called Jesus Valverde, something along those lines. I might be butchering his name, but he's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He spoke about the productivity within value chains. And I'm going to give you the conclusion and then talk about this more in the prelude. I just want to be very short. So the conclusion is that industries, they organize around productivity. So that means that you want to have similar amounts of productivity within your value chain. And if you don't have that, then there's something wrong. And in my opinion, this is actually a paper or one of those things where Jesus thought about, he thought about, probably trying to solve a specific problem within his realm of, in his particular case, it's, dealing with uncertainty in the value chain, and the more, dispersion in productivity, the more uncertainty, and therefore there could be issues in economic, industrial organization, and those sort of things. But what he's really getting to is actually what I call the actual driving force of vertical integration, which is happening across the value chains. Another way to say this is the economic rationale for software eats the world. What I'm saying is that you have software companies who are typically the highest productivity in the value chain, and they're vertically integrating because they can't be selling or buying, but particularly selling to customers with much lower productivity. This is happening across value chains. For example, Tesla is vertically integrating all the way upstream to even mining because of exactly that reason. And we have, companies like Apple vertically integrating, Amazon, Nvidia, and so on and so forth. So my point to Jesus was that you can actually flip this around. You can say that industries with high dispersion of productivity in the value chain are not good industries. There is probably something wrong with those industries. And the way to capture an industry is to see how much productivity dispersion there is. And if there is a lot of productivity dispersion, you have two ways that this can go. One way is it just becomes a sort of a non-wealth creating industry. I think Uber is like that, where you have high productivity on the Uber side, but very low productivity on the customer side, the taxi drivers and things like that. Or you can have vertical integration like Tesla. So you can actually make predictions here. You can make investment decisions based on that. And this is, of course, one of the key elements of the purpose of why we're going to these conferences, is to actually come up with something really tangible. I spoke with Jesus. He was very interested in my thoughts. He showed me the typical arrogance of an Ivy League professor, but nevertheless, I think he grasped the importance of this, and hopefully it will be incorporated in some future papers. Another paper that I would like to just mention that was discussed, it's the idea of pricing of risk, forward pricing of risk within the options market. And there, I think I had an interesting thought also that I discussed with the author. The author was from the Fed. What they did is forward pricing of options and trying to price, let's say, the risk of a CPI announcement. And what they showed is that the forward options premium of CPI announcement actually went up sort of in the 2021, 2022 range. So this is just, supporting something that we already know, which is that CPI announcements around the Fed, FOMC announcement, those sort of things have become a lot more risky, have become a lot more correlation one events. So he showed numerical data that supports that thesis. This is not even on podcast. It's September 7th, 2023. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 80 basis points. The market's down 40 basis points. For the year, we are up 117.6%. The market's up 14.4%. We're outperforming by 102.2%. So let's talk about the Jesus paper first. So he talks about productivity dispersion within industries. And his angle is the following. He says that companies organize around productivity. So you have high productivity companies. They usually cluster around in value chains. You have low productivity companies clustering around in value chains. And he goes on and makes some predictions and talks about industrial organization. Now, I think, again, in my opinion, this is a lot more important than just capturing the, this is a lot more important than just capturing the idea that companies organize around productivity. I think that you can actually make the argument that value chains with high productivity dispersion are not sustainable. In fact, I'm willing to make the prediction that when you have a market player with higher productivity, that either that market player will vertically integrate and become a wealth-generating company, or the industry will be irrelevant. And I think what's more important is also, how does this happen actually? So, for example, the car industry, right? The car industry is being vertically integrated by Tesla, and that's because Tesla is a high productivity company, and most of the companies within the value chain of the automotive industry are low productivity companies, and that's why Tesla is vertically integrating across the value chain. Now, the question, of course, is, the problem here, or the actual productivity delta, is not that Mercedes and Continental and Magna and all these other companies are low productivity companies, or that their productivity somehow has been lowered. It's that Tesla comes into the marketplace with a much higher productivity, and therefore forces the value chain to become high productivity or vertically integrates. So it's take another example, Apple. Okay, Apple wants to integrate into the software market for cars. It's not that the car companies have lower productivity. They've had the same productivity for decades. It's that now there's a new entrant by the name of Apple, and Apple wants to dominate the market, and they will either force the productivity adjustment onto the industry, or they will vertically integrate. So my prediction is that going forward, you will have a lot more vertical integration driven by software companies, because software companies tend to be the ones that have highest productivity in the economy. So this is software eats the world. This is what's happening already. We've seen that in the last 20 years, the largest market cap creation in the United States. So if you look at market cap creation, if you look at value creation, any which way we measure this, has been driven by Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is a synonym for software, is a synonym for high productivity. So therefore, I think this paper is a beautiful example of how you start somewhere, potentially not even in a place that you wanted to necessarily be. It's not like you decided to write a paper to explain the software eats the world phenomenon or something along those lines. Jesus wanted to write a paper about productivity dispersion within value chains, but then I think stumbles across a nugget, a really, really important nugget. And that nugget is the fact that if you have dispersion in productivity and you have a new entrant into a market, so if you have, let's say you have an industry that has been organizing for decades along a certain productivity, index, right? And now you have a new entrant in the market coming from Silicon Valley with much higher productivity. The prediction is that you will have vertical integration. This is the prediction. This is what's happening already, and we'll have a lot more of that. We have now with AI, we have, for example, generative AI will enable high productivity companies to enter markets such as education, enter markets such as, let's say, document, press, media, and God knows which markets I'm not thinking of right now. But the point is, you have new technology. The technology drives productivity and drives vertical integration. So this is the prediction. This is my conclusion from this paper. I'm going to put the paper in the show notes. I don't want to waste time now with names and things like that. But kudos to the authors. This is a nice example of, I've been pretty disappointed with the economics profession in the last 10, 20 years in terms of what they've produced and all those things. And I think I've been a little bit lazy and unfair on that front because I, quite frankly, haven't done the work. If I'd been reading all the important papers, all the important journals, I think I would come up with a lot more good ideas. And that's why I attended this conference for exactly that reason. I'm really happy that I came across this paper, and it's one of those things. You have to dig a lot for nuggets, and sometimes you find them, sometimes you don't. This is definitely. This is a huge nugget. So to summarize this paper, again, dispersion in value chains based on productivity vectors happens when you have new entrants in the market coming from the software side or AI side. It's happening as we speak, and what we'll see is most likely vertical integration. So we'll have companies, software companies becoming media companies, software companies becoming banks, software companies becoming educational institutions, like you name it. Of course, industries will try to prevent that from happening with regulations and all those sort of things, but nevertheless, you can't stop a trend, and that's what's going on. That's what Silicon Valley has been all about for the last 20 years, and it's going to continue. And my prediction is that 20 years from now, the S&P 500 will be even more concentrated, and that Silicon Valley companies will dominate a lot more industries. So the other paper I want to discuss, it's a little bit more, let's say, technical, but still interesting. So this paper is trying to assess the forward risk premium in the options market for certain Fed events, such as CPI announcement, FOMC meeting, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting here is that the way they measure this is something we used to do in the options market a lot. So I was obviously happy to see that the academia is using this type of techniques, forward pricing of options. Technically not very difficult. I don't want to go into details, but just let's say that you can use market prices to price the implied risk premium of certain events such as CPI announcement. And what they find is that after 2022, the risk of CPI announcement has gone up, meaning the price of hedging against those types of announcements has gone up a lot. Another way to look at this is also that those types of events have become more correlation one events, which means that they drive the market on that particular day. And that's something that's a corollary of that research that I spoke with the author about, and he agreed that that is another way to look at it. So again, very interesting. It's more technical, more measuring. I think a lot of science is measuring. It's the same in physics. It's the same in material science. A lot of science is really finding things to look at, measure, and then come up with theories. Sometimes the theory is first. Sometimes it comes after. Observations are theory laden. So in order to make measurements, sometimes we need theory. So it's a dynamic to and fro, and it's a nice example of how in the economics profession you can do real quantitative measures that are actually important for the market. So to summarize, my second day at the SIDE conference 2023 at Stanford was really successful. I had two really successful interactions with the authors. One is the paper about dispersion of productivity in value chains that has given me really a nice framework to think about industrial organization, about investing, about the fundamental drivers of why we will see more vertical integration coming from Silicon Valley. In a nutshell, productivity dispersion is driven by new entrants with high productivity, and what they usually do is vertically integrate, namely Tesla, SpaceX, NVIDIA, and probably in the future other companies. You have also companies like Uber or Airbnb that are high productivity companies going into low productivity industries, and they have trouble vertically integrating, and therefore the problem there is that the wealth creation stalls, and we've seen that also. Another paper I discuss here in this episode is the paper about the forward risk premium of events such as CPI announcements. There's an econometric analysis about this that shows that CPI announcements indeed have become more risky and priced as more risky in the market. Again, that's maybe not such a big surprise, but nevertheless, it's a nice example of how economics is really a science in terms of that we measure things, we have a theory, we measure things, and then we come up with conclusions, and those conclusions can lead to new ideas, and so on and so forth. This is what science is all about, and I think today was a nice example of that the science of economics is not that it can actually continue to be useful and bring even value to investors, not just to governments and things like that, but actually investors. And the paper about the dispersion of productivity is a really beautiful example of how you can use this framework to analyze industries and invest along those lines. Thank you.